This is Mr. Michael Ezanata here. Welcome to our first virtual mathematics class. I want to believe that you all are safe in your respective homes, trying to do your best in your little corners to curtail the spread of this deadly COVID-19 disease virus that has been on rampage for quite a while now. So, as I say, necessity is the mother of invention. So for the time being, we'll be having our classes through this medium. I'll be providing videos, instructional videos that you watch and then follow the instructions. You can watch it as much as you want, and then also try to solve the assignments included and submit. That's the only way I can track your progress, and also reach out if you need more clarifications or assistance. Okay, so yeah, I'm having a whiteboard here, so that means I can write and do a lot of things. Okay, as we progress, you're going to see some tricks. I can even play with this whiteboard I have. As I already said, I can write, I can even clean, and so many other things. Okay, for today, we'll be looking at the topic logic in mathematics. We did look at it in a passing in the last time, but I felt that I feel that we should have a more detailed study about it. Okay, as it's a tool that will come quite handy even as we grow and advance in life. Talk about arguments, you have logic there. So it is something that when you're well equipped with the rudiments of logic, the principles of logic, you can be able to make propositions, statements, assumptions, and all that, and when examined, they will come out just fine when you understand the very basics of logic. So that is why we need to study this. You might wonder, how does that concern mathematics? Well, as we progress, you will see, because even in your computer science, in the computing world, computer makes use of logic so much. You must have been taught in your ICT, the logic gates and all that. So, but we'll study it. Okay, now let's go over the concept of logic. What is logic? Now, logic is a branch of mathematics. Mathematics has different branches, so logic is one of them. It tries to study reasoning. That's a special kind of thinking. You know, you have types of thinking. You have critical thinking, analytical thinking, which logic comes under. You have creative thinking. You have convergent, divergent thinking, and all that, and all sorts of thinking. So logic is a branch of mathematics which deals with thinking or reasoning. So I have a definition here that I want us to look at. Okay, so I said that logic is the analysis of methods of reasoning. It's the analysis of the methods of reasoning. It is a special kind of thinking in which conclusions are drawn. They are drawn from premises. We're going to look at that and try to break it down. So it is the analysis of methods of reasoning. In other words, there is a particular way of reasoning. You don't just reason anyhow. There are things that are called premises, which we are also going to look at and see the meaning, and then conclusions. It is from the premises that you draw your conclusions. Okay, so it means that the premises they are very, very crucial in logic. So because when your premise is faulty, then of course your conclusion will always be faulty. It might be right at the moment, but overall when you examine it, it becomes a faulty conclusion. So, but when the premises are right, then we can be able to draw valid conclusions that is acceptable. Okay, so logic is simply a kind of thinking, a kind of thought process in which conclusions are drawn when we examine premises. So there are ways which we go about. So the way that we go about in drawing this conclusion is where logic comes in. You have a premise at hand, then how you connect the dots and then come out with your conclusion. That is where logic. So it is the analysis of the methods involved in your critical thinking, in your analytical thinking or reasoning. That is logic. That's just what logic is. So just know that logic is simply a kind of thinking in which conclusions are drawn from premises. Now, in our study of logic, there are some keywords that we'll be making reference to, even in the future videos. So I want to define those keywords and have you understand what they mean. Okay, so let's look at keywords in logic, and let me also state at this point that you are free to pause this video and then make some notes if where necessary, and then you continue. That would be a better way for you to learn. So you pause the video, make notes when you need to make notes, and then you continue. So let's look at the keywords in logic. Let's look at the keywords in logic. Okay, so I have about 3 of them here. The first one is what is called proposition. Whenever you talk about logic, you always hear of propositions. And what are propositions? This one here. What are propositions? Propositions, they are declarative sentences which are true or false. It is a declarative sentence which is either true or false, but not both. It cannot be true and false at the same time. It is just a sentence which is either true or false, but not both at the same time. So that is a proposition. For example, the sky is blue. Okay, Nigeria is a country. Those are sentences. So you can't say Nigeria is a country, Nigeria is the local government, no, or Nigeria is the local government, no. They are declarative sentences which are either true or false, but not both. That's what we call a proposition, and we're going to use quite a lot of them in this class, proposition. So whenever I talk or make mention of a proposition, just know that they are sentences which are they're either true or false. Okay, you have the next one, that is premise. Remember I made mention of premise earlier, that we draw conclusions from premises. Okay, so what is a premise? A premise is simply the building block of a proposition. So when you make a statement, so the building block of those statements, they are what we call the premise. It is from those premises that we make inferences or conclusions. So that is just what premise is. It is the building block of any given proposition. It contains the block from which we can build or make our conclusions. Then we have the next one, truth value. The truth value of a proposition is simply whether that proposition is true or false. That is just the truth value, whether the proposition is true or false. For example, Nigeria is a state in the United States of America. That is a proposition. Now the truth value of that statement is what? Is false, because Nigeria is not a state in USA. But what about when you say Lagos is a state in Nigeria? Now when you want to talk about the truth value of that statement, it is true, because Lagos is actually a state in Nigeria. So that is just what you that's what we mean by truth value. It is just trying to determine whether a statement is true or false. So these are the basic keywords we're going to be looking at in logic. Proposition, simply a statement which is either true or false, but not both at the same time. Then the premise is the building block of the proposition from which we draw conclusions, and then the truth value is simply whether a statement is true or false, just to determine whether a statement is true or false. Okay, that will take us to the next thing we will look at, and that is an example of we want to look at example of logical statements. So you see the premise and all that, and conclusions at work. So let's look at examples of logical statements. So we have statements here. Now okay, we have the first one. All dogs have 4 legs. Now this is an example of a premise. Bingo is a dog. Both of these sentences, they are what we call premises. They are the building block, and both of them are also propositions. So the proposition now is that all dogs have four legs. That's a premise, that all dogs have four legs. Bingo is a dog. Now, what conclusion or inference can we make from this statement or from these premises that all dogs have four legs and we have a dog? We have a bingo, which is also a dog. Conclusion. Okay, look at the conclusion. We can say that bingo has four legs. Now, does this stand? Yes, it does, because our premise stated that all dogs have four legs, and then we have a bingo. Bingo is a dog. So if bingo is a dog, and we know that all dogs have four legs, then of course bingo has four legs. You see how that works? That's an example of logical statement that all dogs have four legs. Bingo is a dog. So just as I said, note that this one is your premise. That's a premise. Okay, don't mind the writing. That's a premise. Okay, while this one is a conclusion, let me call that C. So we draw this conclusion by studying our premise. That's how we draw conclusions. So from the premise, you study them and then you draw your conclusions. We're also going to look at an example of an illogical statement, but for now we're still looking at logical statements. So all dogs have four legs. Bingo is a dog. The conclusion, and this conclusion is valid, that bingo has four legs. Okay. Now, how about when someone goes ahead to say that bingo has four eyes? Now, going by what we have, the premise talks about four legs. Nothing was made talked about. Nothing made mention of eyes. So, if we should conclude that bingo has four eyes, based on the given premise, that would be an invalid conclusion because our premise did not include anything about eyes. Okay, so that's also how logic works. So you must always work within the scope of the given premise. You do not make assumptions. Every assumption will have to be based or hinged upon the premise that has been provided. So there is no need for further or for it to run wild and then make other assumptions. Maybe dog, big, no. Just also always stick to what has been provided. Let's look at another example of logical statements. Okay, look at this one. You have a premise that Nigeria is located in West Africa. Now, the second one, Ebutu is a town in Nigeria. Then we can make the valid conclusion that Ebutu is a town in West Africa. Does that hold? Yes, because if Nigeria is in West Africa on the map, and then Ebutu is also in Nigeria. Now, when you want to talk about the world in general, like on a wider world map, when you talk about Ebutu, you can make the reference or make the valid conclusion or inference that Ebutu is a town in West Africa. So this is the premise, and this that we have here is a valid conclusion because it holds up when we scrutinize it under the given premise that Nigeria is located in West Africa and Ebutu is a town in Nigeria. So it means that Ebutu is a town in West Africa. That's how simple it is, your premise and your conclusions. Now let's look at example of an illogical statement or conclusion. Let's look at that so that you see the remarkable difference between both. Now look at this one. We have the proposition here and the premise. And our premise is that the premise states that every Nigerian footballer in the Premier League is highly paid. Okay? Every Nigerian footballer in the Premier League is highly paid. Now we have a statement here. This here is a statement. John plays for Enyimba Football Club. John plays for Enyimba Football Club. And then we have our conclusion. John is highly paid. Now think about that for a moment. Is this a valid conclusion or an invalid one? The premise states that every Nigerian footballer in the Premier League is highly paid. And if you must know, Premier League is the English football league, as the league that you have, just like in Nigeria, we have our own national league. in England, their own league, national league, is called the Premier League. So every Nigerian footballer that plays ball in England is highly paid. Now we have a statement: John plays for Enyimba Football Club. And I ask the question, is our conclusion that John is highly paid, is it a valid one? And of course the answer is no. Okay, now I made mention earlier that you do not make assumptions, you always work within the scope of your given premise. Now the premise stated that every Nigerian footballer in the Premier League is highly paid. Now John plays for Enyimba Football Club. Now it might be possible that John is highly paid in Enyimba Football Club, but because nothing was said about how much footballers are being paid in Enyimba Club, whether they are being paid highly or not, and then there is a conclusion here that John, who plays in Nigerian League in Enyimba Football Club, is highly paid, then this, in this case, is an invalid conclusion because it does not go, it does not agree with our premise. Our premise is limited to English Premier League, while John plays in Nigerian Football League. So we cannot make the assumption, even though that John might be actually paid high in Enyimba Football Club, but your reasoning, logic dictates that this is an invalid conclusion. Okay, so every Nigerian footballer in Premier League is highly paid. John plays for Enyimba Football Club. Then the conclusion, John is highly paid, becomes an invalid conclusion. So this is an example of an invalid conclusion, a logical statement, invalid conclusion. That is just the introduction on logic. So we have looked at the meaning of logic, which said is simply a kind of thinking in which conclusions are drawn from premises. Yes, but there are ways we go about them. We don't just draw conclusions anyhow, as we have seen in some of the few examples that we've looked at. Your conclusion has to be in agreement with the premise. You don't make any further assumptions. Okay, and it's also good to know that you can have so many premises, not just one. You can have a whole lot of premises, then you have a statement which you examine, and then you draw your conclusion based on the information provided in the premise. Okay, so this is just an introductory video. In a later future videos, we'll also look at the concept of symbolic logic and then truth tables. Yes, we'll also look at that, symbolic logic and truth tables. When we look at that, then we'll also look at, okay, so many other things, We'll take it one step at a time. So for now, just go over the video, make sure you go over it, take notes, and try to reason it out. Okay, try to make connections, see why things are what they are. All right. Okay, and then after you must have done that, you're going to do some assignment for me. Okay, let me go scroll down to where I have the assignment. So my assignment is this. All right, this is it here. So you have to write out an example. Okay, 5 examples of logical statements with valid conclusions. So you make statements just like we have up there. Maybe John, okay, like the one that we have, Nigeria is a country in West Africa. Equity is a town in Nigeria. Therefore, the conclusion which is valid is that Equity is a town in West Africa. So I need you to think, okay, come up with 5 logical statements or premises and then draw valid conclusion. Then for the B part of it, I want you to come up with 3 premises and then draw invalid conclusions. Okay, oh, this is, I meant 3 logical statements, not illogical now. I meant that you should write out 3 logical statements with invalid conclusions. Okay, just like the other one we had. So the one that we had about illogical examples of illogical statements. So make three, try to write out three logical statements and then draw invalid conclusions. This is just to exercise your brain to be able to, for you to start thinking, for you to understand fully what we are doing here. So make sure you write them out. 5 for logical statements with valid conclusions, and then 3 logical statements with invalid conclusions. Okay, so when you do that, I will see you in the next video. But for now, please stay safe at home. I'll be seeing you in the next video. Please make sure you submit your assignment before the next class. Okay, so bye.